the queen of vocal exercise. Who is it and what can it do for us in our vocal training? Let's find out now. You see, just like the queen in the English chess, the queen of vocal exercise is very functional and versatile as well, because it is very powerful and it works in many ways to train your voice. You see, the queen of vocal exercise is the SOVT exercise, which stands for Semi Occluded Vocal Tract exercise. So, what are Semi Occluded Vocal Tract exercise? First of all, let's break the word into two parts. We have semi occluded and then we have vocal tract. First of all, let's look at vocal tract. All it says is it has something to do with our vocal tract. And our vocal tract, it starts all the way from our larynx up and into our nose cavity and into our mouth cavity. And of course, that includes the pharynx, and or you can call it the throat behind as well. So you see, now we know what is vocal tract. Let's talk about what is semi-occluded. So if you were to search on Google the definition for occlusion, this is what it means. It's basically to create a closure at an opening. So semi-occlusion, it means that we're going to create a partial closing of the opening of the vocal tract. And how do we do that? Let me give you an example. But before that, understand that there is two types of occlusion that we can go about doing. First of all, when it comes to the opening of our vocal tract, we have pretty much only two openings: our nose and our mouth. Because try this. Try pinching your nose and then close your mouth and then try to make any sound. Try that. It's impossible to make any sound if you keep your nose closed and you keep your mouth closed, because there is no flow of air. So when there's no flow of air, the air cannot pass through your vocal cords for your vocal cords to vibrate and generate and produce a sound. So when it comes to semi-occlusion, we're going to close the nose or the mouth partially to create what we called a back pressure, which I'll explain more later on. But just to give you an example first, if let's say we are doing a semi-occlusion at the mouth, here's how it might look like. So one of my favorite exercises for semi-occlusion at the mouth is actually the blowjob vocal exercise. And it looks a bit like this. So what I did there was, I blowed air to cause my cheeks to expand, and I fill the air up in my cheeks like this. See, if there's no occlusion at the mouth, then what will happen is more like this. Because now the sound can come out from my mouth. But now, if I were to close my mouth like this, the opening just effectively reduced from this size to this size. And because of this closure at the opening of my mouth, therefore I semi-occluded my entire vocal tract, because now the sound can only come out from this small area instead of this big. And that's what semi-occlusion at the mouth could possibly look like. Now, there are many variations of occlusion at the mouth. Another exercise is the straw slide, which you might have seen in some of my other exercises. Or if you are interested to find out more, then go ahead and click on the link below to find out the 3 proven ways to train and sing your high notes well. And those are the 3 proven ways that I have personally used to train my own voice. So now that is one of the 2 things that we can occlude, and that is our mouth. Now we can also find semi-occlusion in our nose. Because the truth is, there will be sound coming out from our nose as well. You see, in fact, when a sound comes out from our nose, as long as it is not too much, then it is actually a healthy amount of what I called nasal resonance. And in complete mixed voice, I'm always talking about how you need to have both the head resonance, the nasal resonance, and the chest resonance all coming out simultaneously at the same time in order for you to be in a real mixed voice. And in fact, that's the key to being a mixed voice. But of course, at the same time, you need to have a high placement and not a low placement. And at the same time, allow all three resonances to come out equally. Or you can adjust it based on the kind of emotions and the feelings you're trying to express in your song. But let me just keep that thought apart because I want to focus back on SOVT. So how then do we occlude at the nose? One of the most common exercise and one of the exercise that I personally just love is the NG slide, and it goes like this. So what you do is you say the word sang, and then you hold the word NG. You hold the ending NG. Sang, to get into that position of your tongue and to find that nasal position, that nasal resonance position. Because what happens here is, in fact, you don't even have to open your mouth. You can close your mouth and then you can hum as well. That is the more common way, but I personally prefer this. And in my courses, I've explained why, and this is my favorite exercise because at the same time, it also trains your tongue position, which is very important. And if you're interested to find out the perfect tongue position for singing, then go ahead and click on the link below. And I've made a whole YouTube video talking about what is the perfect tongue position that we should be using for our singing. So when you're doing or what you're doing here is you're closing your mouth. Okay, maybe for this one, it might not be obvious because after all, you're still opening your mouth. But if you understand what is happening behind, how your soft palate is coming down to touch your tongue, if you can understand that, then even though my mouth is open, there is no sound or air coming out from my mouth. I mean, you can try it yourself like this. When you say you shouldn't feel air and sound pushing out from your mouth, but rather you can feel that the nose, there is sound, the air coming out from the nose, and you can put your finger in front of the nose like this to feel it. But if that's confusing, then let's just go back to the because it is obvious if you close our mouth and hum. There is no way any air is going to get out from the mouth, and therefore we are only allowing the sound to go through our nose. Now, that by itself actually is already a form of occlusion, because just think about it, your mouth is so big, but your nostril is so small. So even if you just close your mouth and you hum, that by itself is already a form of semi-occlusion, because now your sound is only going through two small nostrils versus one big mouth like ah. So that's the difference. But we can even occlude the nose even further. This might help, especially if you're trying to hum but we still feel that perhaps we need a bit more resistance and back pressure, which I'll explain it later on. So what we can do is we can press one of our nostrils so that we can only allow the air and sound to come out from one of them. You can hear how right now I'm more nasal already because I'm allowing more occlusion to happen at my nose. So look, what you can do is yeah, so what I just did was I gave you a whole wide variety of examples of what happens and what it means to be a semi-occluded vocal tract exercise. In fact, there are more common ones like or they are all some form of semi-occlusion, because understand, as long as your mouth is not open, wide open, there is some closure, then there is semi-occlusion taking place already. And if you think a bit deeper, I will even argue that a vowel like ooh, ooh is also kinda semi-occluded, because your mouth is not like ooh, 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 ooh. There is back pressure coming back, a certain amount, but way lesser than perhaps a blowjob. So now that we have an example, we have seen how semi-occlusion looks like. Let's get to why it works. Because only when you understand why it works, then you'll be motivated to actually go and practice it, because you understand how powerful it is. Imagine in a chess game, if you don't know that a queen can move in all different kinds of positions, then you wouldn't know to treasure the queen. And this is the queen of vocal exercise. So let's understand why. You see, ultimately, the function of all semi-occlusion vocal exercise has one common function, and that is to create back pressure onto the vocal cords. And why do we want back pressure on the vocal cords? Because think about it this way, it's actually to help your vocal cords vibrate more efficiently. Let's pretend that our mouth is open like this. What happens is, let's imagine that from the lungs, where our air is stored at, the pressure coming out is, let's say, arbitrary 10 units. And when 10 units of air pressure comes through your vocal cords, 10 units pass through. But now, if let's say we close our mouth like a blowjob, then what happened is, because now there's a closing at the opening, only a small amount of sound and air could come out from that small opening. And what happens to remaining air and the acoustic energy? Well, it gets reflected back. But back where? Back into your pharynx or throat, and back down into your vocal cords. But this time round, it is going to come back and hit the top of the vocal cords, whereas the air pressure, the air pressure from the lungs, it is going to come from bottom up. So now the back pressure, let's pretend that it has a pressure unit, arbitrary unit of 5 units. So what happens then is, when 5 units come back and there's 10 units coming up, eventually what happens is, the net pressure their vocal cords are taking, 10 minus 5, is 5 units, which means now, compared to 10 units previously, your vocal cords are taking on less pressure. And when your vocal cords are taking on less pressure, it tires out less quickly, and therefore it is a very good device for us to train our vocal cords. And in fact, understand this, a lot of the times, especially for struggling singers and beginner singers, what we tend to do is, and especially if we have this idea of we need to breathe in more air, we have to use more air to sing our notes, to sing our high notes, especially before we train the efficiency of our vocal cords. What's going to happen is, chances are you'll be applying way too much breath pressure than you need for those vocal cords to vibrate. So ultimately, if we don't want our vocal cords to tire out from vibrating and from taking up so much pressure, we need to learn how to reduce and use less air pressure for our vocal cords to vibrate and work efficiently. Of course, there's two parts of the equation. The first part is how much breath pressure you actually use, and the second part of the equation, which is what we're trying to do here, is to use semi-occlusion to actually train your vocal cords to have this memory, to understand and to remember how it feels like to produce the same sound while taking in a net pressure of only 5 units, so that eventually over time, you don't even need to close your mouth. I mean, let's face it, singers, when they sing on stage, when they battle those high notes, when they sing those high notes, those head voice, they don't close their mouth. They don't do that, right? They open their mouth and they sing the high notes. And what it does is, eventually as your vocal cords gets more efficient and it has the memory of how can I use less pressure to create the same pitch and maybe even louder sound, then that is where you're actually improving the efficiency of your vocal cords. Because efficiency is less input for more output, less amount of breath pressure. I can sing higher, I can sing louder. And that is why this is the queen of vocal tract exercises, because it really trains your vocal cords to be, immerse your vocal cords in a state where it is going to be optimum, where it is learning to be efficient. Because let's face it, chances are if you don't have semi occlusion in your training, if you don't include that in your vocal training, that's a big issue. Especially if you're a struggling singer which have a pair of inefficient vocal cords. You see, a lot of naturally born talented singers, maybe they don't even need semi occlusion vocal tract exercises. Why? Because their vocal cords are already efficient. So what they need is, they have to learn how to sing with their mouth open. But for beginner and struggling singers, we are way better off just first learning how to make our vocal cords remember the feeling of being efficient, remember the feeling of using less breath pressure to achieve a greater output, and that is louder and higher pitches. If let's say we struggling singers, we don't use semi occlusion, which is what happened to me for the first 2 years of myself learning from a vocal coach, my first ever vocal coach. I had zero semi occlusion training. But over the past 1.5 years, I've been including semi occlusion training in my daily training every single morning. It's 5 to 6 days a week without fail. And that's how I'm able to see tremendous improvements in my singing. And you too can see crazy improvements in your singing as long as you are consistent with using and incorporating SOVT exercises into your daily training. So I hoped this video has cleared up your doubts on what are SOVT exercises and how SOVT are just literally the queen of vocal exercises, because it helps your vocal cords become so efficient over a shorter period of time. Look, I love you. I hope you took away some value from today's content. Right now, I'm gonna go out and, I don't know, maybe perm my hair or something. So, I love you, and I'll catch you later. Peace.